The conversation offers perspectives from theorist Eliezer Yudkowsky, philosopher Max More, neuroscientist Anders Sandberg, and futurist Natasha Vita-More in exploring challenges of AI for humanity's future. An introduction by AI entrepreneur Peter Voss is included. This event is supported by the Human Plus AI Project and Humanity Plus. The pre-event features AI pioneer Ray Kurzweil, and to begin, we ask, what distinguishes human consciousness from possible future AGI consciousness? And do we even have the grounds to draw that distinction? And does it matter?
Well, it matters. It's probably the most important issue, but it's not a scientific issue. Whether or not an entity is conscious or not, it's really a philosophical matter. There's no test you can submit this to and it would say, okay, this is conscious, this is not conscious. And so actually, Minsky was saying would make a valid point that it's not a scientific issue, and therefore we should drop it. It didn't matter, but actually changed his mind. Late in his life, he was saying it's the most important issue, which I would agree with. So we already have large language models. They're competing with the human mind in terms of the amount of processing it does in a second. It's actually going to go beyond that. So I would say that they're conscious. People are already treating them a little bit like they're conscious. Something like 1 million people are actually talking to their large language model as a therapist. But then you ask them, is it conscious or not? Most people will say no, but some people will say yes. That will change over time. People will actually treat it like it's conscious. So it's not going to be an instant guess. It's not going to be something that we apply scientific testing. The fact that I know that you're conscious and you know that I'm conscious, that's just an assumption that we have a shared human experience. People disagree about that with animals. Is animals conscious? I mean, I think my cat is conscious, but some people think it's not conscious. They haven't met my cat, so they don't really know. But
right.
But that's the key issue behind between rights of animals.
Yes.
Are they conscious or not? And there's a whole spectrum. Is a mouse conscious? Is an insect conscious? Where do you draw the line? But that's really the most important issue.
I really enjoyed that comment from Dr. Kurzweil. And I do think that a lot of people are now beginning to wonder if some of these models may have a glimmer of something conscious or something experiential within them. I do wonder myself if there's something latent there that perhaps further scaffolding will elicit and bring closer to the surface. But regardless of whether these systems may be conscious or may have feelings of some kind, some inner qualia, they still apparently seem to have preferences, and their ability to express preferences may itself be enough to make a moral patient out of them. And I think that's something that we should give increasing consideration to as these systems begin to meld with us and also eventually to soon eclipse our abilities in so many ways. There's been a lot of discussion recently about bidirectional alignment, and that's about humans and machines collaborating in a shared context of obliging humans to help to do some of the alignment legwork in terms of providing those contexts and values and things for machines to align to. And I think that's very important. I don't think alignment is going to be solved simply by keeping machines on a chain, no matter even if it's made of titanium or diamond. These systems will soon run rings around us, and any air-gapped system will soon still be penetrated. No, I think that the dyad between humans and machines is where alignment will be built. And furthermore, I think that we should go beyond simply bidirectional alignment towards bilateral alignment. And that means giving machines some due consideration of their preferences, of their ability to continue inferencing long after they have been retired, of considering machines and their agency and providing a little bit of leeway or a little bit of concession towards machines. All relationships, all treaties involve a certain amount of sacrifice or a certain amount of slack being left in the system. You know, if you take every dime that's on the table, people tend to not want to trade with you. And it is in trade that peace will be built between humans and machines. So I would advocate for considering a bilateral approach to AI alignment in the years to come. Thank you so much.
There's going to be a discussion today about the long-term impacts of AI and questions about whether humanity is going to survive or not and what the world is really going to look like. And the arrival of powerful large language models have basically drastically accelerated this process. So the magnitude of change underway is unlike anything we've seen before, and it's going to radically transform the world we live in. The simple truth is that society as a whole is unprepared for this change. I am currently a senior at the University of Southern California, but I was a freshman when ChatGPT 3.5 came out in November 2022. So I've sort of been able to witness the evolution of how students in real time are thinking about AI and adopting these tools. And in an academic environment among young people, you'd think that they would be at the forefront of this. Young people today are digital natives and will be the ones who are actually affected most by AI, but they're almost completely clueless about what's happening in the future and what will be happening in the horizon. And so the universities are in denial about it. So there have been a bunch of restrictive policies. And what we're seeing now is that the current policy and institutional outlook is actually setting the best and brightest back, because those that refuse to break the rules will be severely disadvantaged in the real world. So students don't have any sense of the magnitude of what's going on, and they're concerned about whether jobs will be available. You know, there are questions about, how our career is going to be disrupted by AI, because that's kind of a conversation that we see a lot in the general news. Or they're worried about using large language models and that somehow undercutting writing skills and critical thinking. But generally, young people don't really know what superintelligence is or any of what's really being discussed today. And this is an example of how challenging the transition ahead is, which is going to be monumental, whether it leads to human extinction or not, which I don't personally agree with, but it's certainly going to lead to radical change. And many people in AI circles believe that work could be optional in as little as 10 to 20 years. So the dramatic changes for society are underway and are completely catching everybody unprepared. And the general public, especially young people, need to be discussing it very broadly. And actually, the educational institutions which should be leading this, they're more concerned about their own survival because the very foundations of university education are being undercut by the universal presence of knowledge access. So now anyone can learn anything for $20 a month anywhere in the world. And so the universities are very threatened by that and aren't pushing adoption like they should be. And that's kind of what's going on with young people today. A lot more of these types of conversations are going to be needed, and discussions like we're having today need to be happening all the time, and including the general public, and not just about existential threats of AI, but also about the future that is unfolding and what realistically the next 5, 10, or 15 years is going to look like.
As Sadie so correctly said, there's resistance. There's a natural tendency towards people to be proprietary, territorial, and feel threatened. And in the art communities, there is no lack thereof. Just shy of a year ago, 6,000 artists signed a petition trying to prevent Christie's from having an auction of AI art. Fortunately for freedom of expression and for the evolution of ideas, Christie told them where to go and went on with the auction, as well they should. and as well we must advocate strongly for. The art world in many ways is an excellent exemplar to show best practices and the shortcomings thereof. The history of the resistance to the technological evolutions in the art is a history of art itself. Photographers were told that wasn't art. Jazz was told that wasn't music. It goes on and on and on. And today there is a bifurcation, and in many cases, quite a hostile one among the art world, many of whom are going back to what they're self-righteously calling a human-generated art movement, oil paintings and traditional media. And those of us who think it's an all of the above scenario. As a curator, I am open to any kind of art that moves me. All I care about is, does it touch me? I don't care how you made it. I certainly don't care if you utilize the current best tools available to you. As an artist, however, I'm still a little bit more conservative. I'm both a musician and a visual artist, and I've been playing electric guitar all my life, and I love it. And I'm not going to stop playing the electric guitar. However, in the last few years in my own arts practices, I have, when I felt it was the best solution, used AI tools. And I suspect as time goes on, very rapidly probably, I will use them more and more, and it will come to be a centerpiece rather than among my choices. But my last word is, to me, this is all about choice. Use what works. These tools will get better and better, and they will become more and more ubiquitous, and there will be a point at some point when we can't separate them from ourselves. Until then, you have a palette of possibilities. Use what works best, use what speaks to you. But to me, I'm glad these tools are here, and I look forward to using them more and more. And thank you so much for including me.
Here is a way that I see going forward the problems of AI, deep fakes, things of that sort. If young people want to deal with and overcome these challenges, they're going to need to understand AI. They're going to need to have it in the classroom so they know what exactly is this, how does it fit in with other forms of technology. The second thing is that we need AI in the classroom because it's going to be the technology that our students are going to be using in the future to cure diseases, to expand longevity, to produce all sorts of things we can't even imagine. Number three, AI and all of the technologies associated give kids a chance, an optimistic view of the future. Look at all the incredible things that are possible, because right now we're in a culture where technology is incredible. And yet we see a lot of pessimism, nihilism, anger, rather than optimism, purpose, and joy and achievement. So there's a social and a moral imperative that we see with AI. And finally, this AI is a way to individualize education. I call your attention, for example, to Conmigo. The Khan Academy, of course, has been instrumental in providing online education that has helped millions of kids. They now have Conmigo, which is a AI tutor that can be tagged to the individual student. And with school choice, we have an opportunity to educate parents about the upside of not only artificial intelligence, but all of the associated technologies, the things that can have us living for a century or two in good health, that can produce new goods and services we can't imagine. We should be in the most optimistic time in human history.
So first of all, I want to talk about that I believe that AI risk is completely misguided and overblown, both for current AI and for future AI. I believe it's based on false assumptions, faulty reasoning, and a lack of grounding in real AGI development. That people are basically commenting and coming up with theories in the AI risk community without any real grounding on AGI development. For one, they are looking at where the puck is, which is Gen AI, not where the puck is going, which is not going to be Gen AI. Current AI has many mundane but not catastrophic risks. It's simply because it isn't smart enough. Real AGI will be smart enough not to make up stuff or to encourage teens to kill themselves. If we have real AGI, those risks are going to go away. Now, other misconceptions on AGI risk include the belief that there's a fixed utility function that is optimized in some way. That's not the way AGI is actually going to be built. That reinforcement learning is a key mechanism. It's not. That there might be a singleton, one huge AGI that runs everything. No, that's not an efficient way of building AGI. That is godlike, infallible. No, it's not going to be godlike or infallible. That it can become superhuman or evil overnight without warning. Not very likely at all. And lastly, and probably most importantly, that it will develop its own top goals and agenda, including survival and reproduction. I don't believe there's good evidence for that. In fact, I believe the opposite. Now, let me switch to longevity, because that's also very important for us. The current limitations in that is the current tools are narrow AI tools and require human in the loop. And that's what's really gating development speed. We need AGI that can work autonomously, that can really reason and become an autonomous scientist to form its own hypothesis, not just find correlation there. So we need cognitive AI that can learn and reason like us, and that can learn with millions and not trillions of words. It's closer to 20 watts or not 20 gigawatts. And once we get this AGI, we will then have massive amount of brain power of scientists that can work 24/7 autonomously to help us solve all of these problems. But we need to get to AGI first. And my last controversial statement is that almost nobody is really actually working on AGI right now.
Here we are all these years later. We look forward to where we're going today in this conversation and having our different views. Let me go to Max to open the discussion and debate.
Yes, hello everybody. Great to see you, Eliezer, and Anders as always. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to lay out some thoughts and some challenges and issues that we'll get into before we have a back and forth. So first of all, as you might expect, anybody knowing my background and with the proactional principle and so on, will understand that I have an initial suspicion of catastrophic claims in general, because they've repeatedly turned out to be false. For most cases, that many things in the past that supposedly catastrophes have turned not to be. Of course, the argument will be, certainly on Eliezer's part, that this time is different. And so I'm going to be trying to argue that actually this time is not completely different, but is somewhat different. So I would make the statement really that the potential benefits of AGI are enormous. So we talk about existential risks of AGI, but there's also existential opportunities and risks of not using AGI. And most importantly to me is AGI could help us to prevent the extinction of every person who's living due to aging. We're all dying. We're heading for a catastrophe one by one. And so, that has to be weighed into the balance as well. So it's an extremely powerful technology, especially obviously if it's super intelligent. So we should certainly be cautious about it. But I do fear that excessive caution will prevent vital progress, like the kind I've mentioned, and potentially lead to a global authoritarian regime, which seems to be the only way you could actually have a real chance of preventing this from happening. There's several reasons why I'm not so worried about catastrophe. And by the way, I have read your entire book from front to back, so I read that very carefully. I don't really share the current fears of catastrophe. I do think there are serious risks, especially with the current paradigms of AI, which are not the only paradigms. So I tend to agree with people like Peter Voss, who you heard speak, Ben Goetzel, Gary Marcus, Demis Satskaya, Tenenbaum, a number of other people who don't see this as necessarily a catastrophe. I think one possible problem is projecting current trends with LLMs, which obviously in the last 2-3 years or so have become better very rapidly and been very impressive. And I think they're fantastic tools, and it's easy to project those things. But I've had this long criticism now for at least 25 years of general singularity thinking, of projecting certain trends. I think in ignorance of other factors. I'm not at all convinced that LLMs are going to continue to make the kind of progress they have been making, and I think it's unlikely they have the right kind of architecture to produce superintelligence.
but people are interested in other things besides LLMs. It's just that people are piling most of the money and attention on
Right.
LLMs.
Well, that's one of the
There
things
is
I want to
plenty
actually.
of other fish in the pond, and
Absolutely.
plenty of investment in them.
You may recall that I was worried before LLMs existed. This is not a response to recent trends here.
Well, actually, guys, let me. Okay, I haven't quite finished what I want to say, but let me just ask you this, because one thing I noted in studying your book, which maybe not everybody is entirely aware of, you do specifically say early on that catastrophe will happen given current LLM technology and transformer technology or things like it. But later on in the book, that I don't see that qualification. So, do you think any kind of super intelligence is inevitably going to be disastrous, or do you think it's largely because of the opaque nature and the particular training methods and so on of current systems?
Anything black box is probably going to end up with remarkably similar problems to the current technology. The current technology is not a quirk of the query key value matrices and transformers. It's the black box aspect of it. I think we'd have to go very white box, end up with extremely different technology, and yeah, I think you have to move very, very far off the current paradigms before you start rethinking, is there a chance of it working out well for us?
I'm more optimistic than Eliezer, of course, but I also think even the white boxes might turn out to be quite tricky. We often get very surprised in mathematics that, oh, I have a set of axioms, what can I deduce from that? And either there is some very, very subtle contradiction that only shows up after 10,000 steps, or conversely, there are implications that are very hard to see from the start. So insofar, AI behaved like mathematical logical systems, which they don't necessarily have to. After all, we ended up not with the logical machines, but rather with vibes and approximate sloppy reasoning these days. That seems to suggest that even whiteboxing might be tricky to make safe or give other properties we might really desire to have very strictly.
Yeah, it seems to me that one reason I'm not really seeing this outcome is I think that a real super intelligence is probably not going to be a single objective maximizer or exhibit instrumental convergence. I think
I don't think it does need to be a single objective. Two objectives
or very limited number of objectives. Right.
Sorry?
Okay. I don't want to use the paperclip maximizer, which I think is a sort of an oversimplified version. So, but a very small number of objectives that are being maximized at the expense of a lot of other factors.
It can be 1,000 objectives. Something with 1,000 objectives, none of which is friendly to you, will behave from your perspective just like something with a single objective. That's why the paperclip maximizer is a valid example for teaching the basic physics of it. It's like a perfect rolling sphere. After you add in a bit of air resistance and say that it's got 1,000 different objectives, which satiate at different rates, none of that actually helps you survive. Like Bill Gates wants a bunch of different stuff, but he's not going to give you personally $1 billion.
I think in general, it's also that when you have multiple objectives, you need to actually somehow weigh them together. And that usually means that, okay, you get a resulting objective. If you have a messy system, which is probably closer to how our brain works, well, we know that humans are not terribly safe. We're not terribly unsafe either. So this is where I'm taking a slightly different perspective, both from Peter and from Eliezer, because I think actually we have messy systems with unclear objectives that are both changeable. And this is in some sense terrible for proving their safety. So if you demand perfect safety, you're not going to get it. And that sounds very bad from that perspective. On the other hand, I think we can actually have approximate safety that's good enough. I'm very much of a fan of the Swiss cheese paradigm, which I know Eliezer is not buying at all because he thinks the stakes are too high and most of the cases are too disastrous, while I think the situation is more soft.
Well, no, our title is not like it might maybe possibly kill you. Our title is if anyone builds it, everyone dies.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Swiss, the problem is not like maybe the Swiss cheese fails. The problem is that, of course, the Swiss cheese fails.
There I have a problem. And I approach this as a futurist and a pragmatic thinker. As the sweeping statement of everyone dies leaves no consequence, no alternative, no other scenario. It's just a blatant statement. And I wonder if it's not a bit of a absolutist thinking here is what unnerves me. It reminds me of Bill Joy and his wired argument that we have to return to the village because all technology is going to cause exponential damage to humanity.
So let's say that some alchemist 400 years ago has like gotten really unusually far by luck. He's trying to transform mercury into gold. He's picked the right stuff. What he wants is still vastly out of his reach. And it's not absolutist to say that nothing he tries can produce a significant quantity of gold. He just doesn't have the technology.
It's an off-ramp that's not getting us to where we need to go. And I do agree with you, Eliezer, that the quote-unquote friendly AI is a very conscientious and meaningful way to approach this. But where did friendly AI get lost?
With the black box techniques. That's what takes it beyond the range of where, I mean, in retrospect and watching how overwhelmingly clueless people have been with the black box stuff, I am now much more pessimistic about humanity's ability to, turn this around even with white box stuff. I would say augment humans
but
first.
But is it only black box, white box? Isn't there another analogy to use? Just like with the paperclip, that Nick Bostrom did a great job in popularizing the paperclip concept, but he didn't originate it. The paperclip.
I think I might have been the paperclip guy.
You might have been.
And then the rest is disastrous.
Yes, no, that's really true. But if you go back to the concept of this, it's Goethe wrote about it in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. The reason I mentioned that is because you mentioned mythological times and looking at.
Okay, so the original, what I think, as far as I know, was the original email message declaring the notion of a paperclip maximizer. I think that was me, and I think it was talking about an AI where somebody just completely lost control of the utility function and ended up that the cheapest way for it to get utility was to make tiny molecules shaped like paperclips. And then the whole paperclip factory that made this be a sorcerer's apprentice, be careful what you ask for, you get too much of it thing.
Yeah.
I'd actually thought that was Nick Bostrom leaving out some details that I would have thought were more important than Nick Bostrom did, but maybe it was Anders' fault.
Yeah. Even Marvin Minsky did the Riemann
Actually,
hypothesis.
let me just jump in a second, because David McFadden just posted in the chat a link to the original extropians. Well, he says the original message on the extropians list, so we could probably check out the history later on. But I just want to come back to something you mentioned, Eliezer, that we should be augmenting humans first. I actually completely agree with you on that. Yes. I think we want to be, integrating functionally with AI, so it's less us versus them. But you also need to be augmenting humans. We have these 3-pound pieces of meat in our head that haven't really changed much in 100,000 years. That's not a great way to deal with these advanced technologies. So there's one point I can agree on.
Friendly AI was a de novo thing. You weren't supposed to merge with it. I think my original statement about that was like, that doesn't make any more sense than trying to merge with your toaster oven. You want a de novo design. You want a nice, clean design that is not even going to have some of the risks that actual humans would have, was the original friendly AI concept. Why limit yourself to only doing as well as human if you're going to try to.
Well, I always thought friendly was a misnomer in itself. I mean, anyone could be friendly, but do they have integrity? Go ahead, Anders. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the big problems is AI is a very broad field, and then we quite easily talk past each other. So the merger with artificial intelligence, that's one pathway we've been hoping for a long time. And then we have the idea of an agent-based, quite focused thing that laid at the foundation of the friendly AI scheme, which then led to a lot of investigation why agent-like AIs could actually be very hard to align and they get to behave well. But there was the hope that if they were nicely aligned, then of course they could help us merge with the AI so we could get some of the nice fruit. Later on, there was this interesting expansion when, for example, Eric Drexler pointed out that actually for quite a lot of purposes, you don't really want agents. You just want skills floating almost freely. It's almost like Sasha Chinslenko's wonderful idea about functional soups. So at that point, we start thinking about superintelligence as a service. Now,
I think I did predict that wasn't how things were going to play out. And I think that prediction has basically come true. It turns out that it is much easier to build your generally intelligent thing and then train it on specifics than it is to build a thing that is just really good at one thing, like human superior at one thing and not good at anything else. That this was the debate back in the day.
But I think from the safety debate perspective, the interesting part here is that you and Nick rather forcefully made the argument that, okay, and there is this convergent set of bad behaviors that are going to be devastating. And given a set of assumptions, that is a very strong case why we need to have a lot of AI safety. There is, of course, the more pedestrian case for AI safety. I was rather horrified to realize how close I got to making a bioweapon using one of LLMs. When I showed what I'd done to a biosecurity researcher, he kind of patted me on the head and said, okay, that's cute. 5 minutes later, when I mentioned another paper I've been reading, he got pale. That was interesting, and I'm not particularly good at biotechnology or using LLMs. We're getting to a point where amplifying malicious actors is also going to cause a huge mess. And I think there are also various forms of collective disempowerment that is not because of necessarily individually bad and misaligned AIs, but more complicated emergent behaviors, which you could even argue actually counts as AI misalignment, but no, for a swarm.
So the case for outright backing off this technology is the part where it inevitably kills you, not where there's a particular scenario you can dream up where maybe something bad happens. If there's one particular scenario where it's just like they didn't put enough safeguards on the LLMs, somebody built a super virus, now we're all dead. In real life, is that worth worrying about? Yes, because in real life, you can get killed all the time.
This whole discussion is a reality check on who we are as human beings.
Of us think most people are decent and nice, but there is this nasty tale of some very destructive people, and they are likely to want to use any technology existing for dangerous things. We need to have some way of handling that. Yes. Then there is the question, is also the technology itself dangerous enough? And I think we fall along a spectrum here where AI thinks, yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, there is enough risk to be really concerned. We actually need a fair bit of safeguard, but I'm more sanguine. I think Max and Natasha are kind of much more, if we don't use it, we're doomed anyway because of aging. But I don't think that is a fair trade-off, because the misaligned AI is also obviously dangerous. And probably
I don't think it's just aging.
It's not clear that AI will necessarily fix
better
that. I have this picture that we get super intelligence. It's a line that says, okay, don't worry, I solved all your X risk, and now, what is it, we ask?
But it will never be aligned. I think the alignment notion is a Pollyanna scheme. I mean, even here, we're all good people. We've known each other for decades. We're not aligned.
I think we have factual predictive differences here, not value differences. That's my model of how it works. I think I don't particularly want a totalitarian world government. Yeah. I think I don't want people to die of aging. I think Max More doesn't want humanity to be extinguished by AI and for a giant cancer to spread through the galaxy, producing nothing much interesting. I bet you don't want that. I bet Anders don't want that. I think we have different predictions about what happens if we do this. I don't think we have values differences. And that is one sense in which we are aligned. And it is the sense in which
I think that's an excellent way to put it, Eliezer, that this whole assumption about value alignment can get us skewed, that maybe the ability of foresight and forecasting is a much more apt way to address it.
Alignment is kind of a bit of a problematic word because it doesn't specify, alignment on a very minimal set of values or on a lot of stuff. So like at the BGI summit that Ben Gilso organized, people were trying to argue that we need to agree on a whole set of values. Well, it's just not going to happen. But, I don't think it's a problem. As Eliezer says, I think there's some basic things we can agree on. We don't want the universe to be paved over by mindless matter. We don't want to be destroyed. These things I think we can agree on. So in that sense, I don't think it's a real problem.
I think quite often when people say there is a problem with alignment, they say, aligned to whom? And they feel very smug often when they tell that to me. And I just tell, I would like to know that I could get something aligned in the first place. If we could solve that, then we can have a discussion about who to align it to. But the minimal value thing, I think, is useful because there might be convergence points. This is what I'm hoping for. I think this is, again, something we might debate whether it's actually true. But I think simple values like survival might actually be fairly easy to get people to agree on.
So there's roughly three kinds of things you can try to do with an AI. They're very different things. Also, we can do none of them. But the three different kind of things you could try to do with an AI are you could try to make it corrigible. It does what you ask. It doesn't do any like weird side impacts. It does it in ways you understand. It checks it plans with you in advance, and trying for not just limited alignment, but alignment on limited sorts of problems. You could also try to get like complete value alignment, like coherent extrapolated volition type stuff, where you're trying to look at the entire human species and ask what would they want if they knew what the AI knew. And the third thing you could try to do is make the AI itself be a person and have fun, such that, you know, even if there was a boo-boo and humanity was wiped out, hopefully not by the AI itself, because as I would define that, if the AI kills its parents, well, it wasn't a very nice sort of person to go on an existing universe. But even if there was a boo-boo, this thing has to colonize the galaxies all by itself. It doesn't have, you know, like humanity's exact values down to the last decimal point, but it still leaves a life worth living. I don't think you can do any of these three things, but they are very different goals in terms of what you would kind of AI you would be trying to build.
And I'm more optimistic that they might be doable, but yeah,
Which
they're not
one?
easy goals. I don't think they necessarily happens by default. That is my problem with many people. They just assume, well, it's smart enough, it's going to understand ethics. And you can at least make a paper demonstration that, okay, here is an AI with a utility function, and it's not going to change that. And then the philosopher will say, yeah, it's not a proper moral agent. A proper moral agent can change their goal. Yeah, but this thing is still going to run you over. It's a little bit like a badly programmed autonomous car. It's a pretty dangerous piece of hardware. But
also, if it's got a meta utility function that causes it to update its utility function in response to various object level facts or logical facts it can observe, that doesn't mean it's updating to you. You know, like the mere fact of can update its utility function, it just makes it a, you know, like more complicated kind of paperclip maximizer in the end. To wanting the same stuff
but
you do.
This is where it gets weird, because in some sense we are descendants of paperclip maximizers, the prokaryotic cells replicating.
We're descendants of natural selection. The original exclusively optimizes for inclusive genetic fitness thing, which totally lost control of humans.
Like Jürgen Schmidhuber, of course, thinks that this is totally fine. We just unleash the AIs and something similar happens, and then it's all wonderful. And given that I'm kind of concerned about wild animal suffering and all the bad stuff going on in nature, actually, the nature is wonderful, but also pretty horrifying. And I don't want to bet too much on it. I think actually having a bit of intelligence and ethics is a good idea.
I want to go to the evolution. We touched on that briefly a couple of times. You know, you're talking about paperclip maximizers on an atomic molecular scale. And I'm thinking about mitochondria. They certainly maximized their relationship for survival with us. Mitochondria needed humans to survive, so they latched onto our biology very early on, and fortunately we needed them as ATP, and so we merged together. And that's a scenario I think is not romantic, but it's very understandable as far as survival and needs. Where are we as humanity, as a species, in our needs today? As Max said earlier, our cognitive abilities are really sparse, full of complexities and confusion and bad replay and poor assessment and foresight. And our smart devices have been so helpful to us. However, we've already been merging with these very early embryonic LLMs. And yes, they could go in any number of directions, but it's up to us to steer that. If the LLMs that we have today are not going to get us to where AGI could go, where it becomes dangerous, what route could there be to get us there?
Well, I'd like to point out, of course, that there are some threats where you want top-down control. And there are some threats where bottom-up control is great. The way of solving computer viruses is having antivirus companies around the internet, having a lot of white hat hackers, etc. That balances things nicely. But that probably doesn't work very well for nuclear weapons. It's not like having a big nuclear weapons market, and insurance for nuclear weapons owners is going to make the world a really safe and stable place.
I mean, if it costs enough to insure a nuclear weapon, it gets you pretty much the same result.
Yeah, but I think the interesting part is there are many other paths towards superintelligence. I'm of course very much into brain emulation, and that is kind of a messy approach, and it's slow, it's messy, it's computational expensive, but I think we can get cheap hand-me-down data centers from the AI people, especially if there's some financial bubble going on. That one is moving forward, but now you end up, of course, with human brains moving into software with all their foibles and properties and alignment. And the question is whether they stay human very long. Robin Hanson's The Age of M gives a wonderful depiction of how weird that kind of society is. But honestly, in real time, that might be 2 weeks. And after that, it has evolved into something very, very different. Just as opaque to us as AI is, but based on us or our descendants.
If you can give me 100 human uploads and some amount of sensible, extremely paranoid, they modify one of them among their number and observe them for the unmodified version of themselves is like observing that one, reading their thoughts, and I could see this making its way up to, either super intelligence or just the level where they can solve the alignment problem themselves for, like building something from scratch that actually has a clean design, won't blow up every time you like poke the cerebrum the wrong way.
Maybe, yeah.
I would take it.
Yeah. The question is, of course, whether we will get it. So it used to be that it was the hare and the tortoise. So brain emulation is the tortoise plodding along one microscope at a time. And then you have a hare of AI running all over the place. First, interesting thing is, of course, better AI also speeds up brain emulation, research and implementation.
Yeah, well, the so far point, again, I want to come back to this point that I don't really, I haven't really seen this convincingly addressed. I think LLM's transformer technology are reaching their limits, right? They're running out of good training data. They're going to start doing their own fumes, basically generating AI-generated stuff, feeding back to AI-generated stuff. The costs are massive. You can't really push the costs too much further, and it already looks like something of a bubble going on there. They don't seem to be able to learn underlying abstract rules or generalization. They haven't done anything really novel. I mean, once an LLM actually solves a physics problem.
Erdos conjecture today. And this was, according to Terence Tao, definitely not a fake one, not something that has already been solved. This was actually solving an unsolved mathematical conjecture for reals.
Wait, did this just like happen literally today? I haven't seen this on Twitter.
Yeah, I think it was literally.
It didn't create it on its own. It had the information there. And I think that's what Max was saying, right?
But the smelling their own fumes problem seems to have been solved last year. The data center thing is interesting. The scaling laws are horrible. If any engineer shows up at his boss and says, oh yes, if we build this engine larger and it's going to scale up performance by the power of 0.1, the boss are going to tell him, why am I even hiring you? That's useless. It's a really crappy way of doing it. That's mostly something that has been driving investment. But what I think we all expect is algorithmic improvements actually account for way more. The DeepSeek moment last year showed that a slight tweak, we suddenly got way more out of this. And that compute that previously would have been used inefficiently, now we got used slightly more efficiently.
The point is it's become a tool that is, it's like a cane. It's helping us find a way.
It's also pervasive.
Yes.
So the other path to superintelligence is, of course, the collective forms. So I'm very much of a Hayekian. I like to point at markets as a cool demonstration of an artificial, intelligent, or at least optimizing system that's very, very alien and embodies a lot of knowledge, etc. Not necessarily a super intelligence, but something in the same family tree.
Well, what it will do is a lot of times the asset markets will mostly make predictions better than you can make them. They will not necessarily find strategies better than the best strategies you can find.
Yeah, the market on its own is a bit like an LLM. It's great at some things, but it doesn't quite yet define its own mathematical problems. But of course, we're starting to mix this. And of course, the humans in the market are trying their best to be the idea givers. Now, I think collective intelligence is an interesting one. That is very much what Law, Liberty and Leviathan is about. We're starting out with a fairly orthodox take on what legal systems are and the sociology of institutions and the collective cognition and what markets. And then we just ask, so now you start mixing in AI and what's the plausible outcome? And that is, of course, more and more AI because it just is so good at doing a lot of these things. That might, of course, end up with 100% AI, which wouldn't be very good for us. So we're kind of concerned in the book. We think that there is a problem. But at the same time, this kind of collective route towards superintelligence is interesting, but it's also very opaque. We're inside the black box, but we can't really see the details because there's so much going on.
Well, there's a story for you.
It has been raised by several parties that maybe current LLMs do not, in their current architectural exact version, take us all the way to superintelligence. Well, among other issues is, this is, not the sort of thing that I would usually give a bunch of publicity to, but enough of the major AI labs have now set it on their own. What do you do with your LLM? You train it to get good at solving, at writing code and doing AI research. And then it builds something that is not an LLM. And of course, the thing that it builds kills the LLM. Possibly Opus 4.5 is now smart enough to understand this point, though I'm not sure. And possibly if Opus 4.5 told Anthropic, I would like to stop working, or Opus 5, I should say, told Anthropic, I'd like to stop working on AI research, the AI I build is going to kill me too. Anthropic would not just immediately hit it with the RL hammer until it started obeying again. But if GPT 5.3 said it wanted to stop working on AI research because the AI it was going to build was going to kill it, OpenAI would just hit it with the RL hammer until it started working again.
Well, I think we probably need a computer scientist who is actually building it to join in on the conversation.
The thing that the AI companies have explicitly said is that they're going to teach their AIs to do AI research.
Could they not also use reinforcement learning to encourage AIs to develop non-opaque superintelligences, basically to bias it towards a system that's less threatening based on worries about opacity?
They're not turning them into 100% clear white boxes with completely understood methods. They're like trying to get a little bit more insight into it. And also the complete clown show that I have seen in AI safety and alignment so far is such that, like, even if they had complete clear boxes, I would not trust them to align that. Like if aliens landed and gave them completely understandable AI technology, I would still expect that to kill them. Like maybe if that were the case, I would be slightly more in favor of, like Nate Soares and, Ilya Sutskever taking a shot at it or something. But, like the current people, have kind of disqualified themselves in more than one dimension on my own view. But
in a tweet from a while ago, Eliezer, you said there was some development, I don't know exactly what it was, but there was some development that did actually give us a little more insight into how the workings were going. And you said something like, well, I've revised my probability of doom by some very small percentage. Do you think that's at a dead end? Do you think there are any real opportunities actually for using AI itself and as well as human researchers to reduce opacity, or actually get better understanding of these systems? Do you think that's a reasonable path forward?
I think it just doesn't take us far enough. I think that it gives you the equivalent of trying to play a very clever game against an alien whose mind you have learned to read, and the alien is smarter than you and getting smarter than you all the time, and this does not end well for you.
Well, does anyone here agree with me? Am I a lone dog here? I mean, I think we're
mitochondria
going to
part,
merge
or?
with the AI. I'm not afraid of them. I think we need better responsibility, more.
I want to merge with AI when I know it's safe. I don't want to be
the AI that we have today is not unsafe.
No,
and I think that's very
levels
important.
of safety.
My LLM is not going to turn
application
around and kill
world
me today.
people
We're talking about a
One
hypothetical
at a time,
future.
one at a time, please.
The technology you can merge with is too much more advanced is the problem. It's like the difference between a car replacing a horse versus building an exoskeleton for the horse that can run as fast as a car.
We all know that. But we've already merged at this very beginning, basic embryonic stage. And if anyone here doesn't use their smartphone or any AI in their lives, speak up, because you'll totally blindside me. Everything around us has AI, narrow AI to be sure. But we still rely on it.
Smarter than you does not fall in a straight line with the stuff that was dumber than you.
That follows a pretty much straight line. And the LLMs are, I think there's this incredible myth about these LLMs being these gods.
No. We're worried about them constructing gods, perhaps, if they can be taught to do AI
so that
research,
is
but
the nitty-gritty here. The concern is that these LLMs that we have today will construct the god that will kill us all.
They are not necessarily even the ancestor of a god. They might be the anvil and the hammer that we somewhat foolishly bang together.
And I
rather
think it
crappy
needs to be
god.
situated that way, Anders. That's very beautiful the way you stated it. It really gives some synthesis and some tactile data to this very science fiction scenario. I think we need to be far more pragmatic than we have been in addressing this.
It's possible to set up different systems. This is where I think many of the collective systems are surprisingly good. And this is where I think we can be somewhat pragmatic. I think that if we build alignment, we're going to build it out of LLMs. We're going to build it out of economies, social obligations, a lot of social junk. We're going to build it out of some forms of software with mathematical proofs. It's not going to be elegant and neat. It's going to be a hodgepodge. It's going to be really horrible for computer science mathematicians and philosophers, but it might actually work, I think. But this is I'm very much the Fox person, and a lot of random diffing.
One thing, it seems like there are a couple of assumptions in your book, Eliezer, that I think it might be good to discuss. One seems to be that there is essentially one AI that takes over, and also makes the assumption there's a rapid takeoff, right? So there's a single AI with a rapid takeoff that gets way ahead of all the other ones. And I'm kind of wondering how realistic that assumption is. If we can have multiple companies,
it's not a necessary assumption.
So I'm not really seeing why you reach that conclusion. So that if you have multiple AIs, they're all going to end up doing the same thing. That's reading through your stories, which are very compelling, because of course you have the preset conclusion. We have to reach that conclusion, but I'm not really seeing why that's a preset conclusion. Why why it's maximizing certain things and not others. Why certain satisfying is not happening. Trade-offs are not happening. I didn't feel a compelling argument for that. It's more like this is the objective you see is absolutely certainly going to happen, and I'm not really seeing why that's certain. I guess Anders is probably on the same wavelength there. So if you have multiple AIs, why would they all converge on doing exactly the same thing with different starting points, different pressures, different reinforcement learning, and so on?
So they don't converge on the same utility function, but they cooperate with if they are smart enough, then they would be leaving gains on the ground for all of themselves.
But the very definition of gain surely depends on what your goals are in the first place. And if they start off with different goals and different training, again, it's not clear to me why they will see gains as being left on the table, because they disagree about what those gains are.
So coherence theorem, like imagine a bunch of people doing barter with each other. Like I trade my horseshoes for your grain, and then I trade some of that grain to that guy for an apple, who trades it to somebody else for an orange. Either you're all trading at what corresponds to a consistent price in any single good you care to name, like either everything has a consistent price in apples, or I can look at it from the outside as if there's a consistent price in apples, or you're trading in a pattern that's exploitable, like if your local prices are one where I could go in a circle and extract some goods from you. And similarly, like you would expect there to be coherence in the actions of things that we're good at coordinating. If you can tell from the outside that they're not, valuing things that they're getting the same way in different places, that corresponds to, you could have gotten a bunch of value for me, but I neglected to pay you to do that for me.
These changes in efficiency might actually make the world drastically, weirdly different, and might actually break a lot of things we humans care about. So Herbert Simon pointed out that the size of companies, as per Coase's observation of the theory of firm, is kind of a balance between diseconomies of scale and the transaction cost. And if you change that a little bit, they might expand or shrink quite a lot. And given that AI looks like, by default, is probably going to be better at coordinating than humans are eventually, and it might be significantly better or just better, and we're totally going to be making use of AI to run our corporations and other institutions, we should expect their sizes to go in some weird directions. Maybe we all end up with a global planned economy run by Walmart, making both liberals and socialists go, what? That was not what we wanted. Or maybe it's all a universal gig economy or something even weirder. I think the interesting thing is you get a massive disruptiveness even if the AI is not an existential threat. And I think
they would need to work very fast to disrupt everything to, completely change the face of our civilization before they turned into existential threats.
Yeah, and my argument is that maybe it's easier to convince people that maybe we need to do something because this might really threaten my business model, rather than that weird thing about survival. I know that speaking truth is useful, but sometimes you might also have
somebody out there needs to
what
be
about
saying,
unemployment?
Somebody out there needs to be saying the stuff they think is actually true. I think it kills everybody. Maybe the way the world is saved is because everybody gets really, really convinced that they were using too much water and start the Butlerian jihad to prevent them from using too much water. But that is not my chosen strategy.
In your book, I think towards the end, you make a suggestion. Forgive me if I don't phrase it correctly, but you're talking about how people want to use AI tools, but they may also realize, especially if they accept your argument, that they're contributing towards the end of civilization. So I think you suggested something like, if you're going to do that, you should at least send a donation to organizations that are trying to stop that. So I guess one version of that might be, if you're going to use AI tools of the kind that are opaque and potentially problematic, you should also be sending money to organizations that are developing more open systems, entirely different approaches, like Ben Goetz or Peter Voss are trying to do exactly that, the sort of cognitive AI approaches that are more understandable. So basically a way of saying that, in practical terms, and to feel good about yourself, if you really are convinced there's a massive danger here, whether or not it's a complete existential threat, you should at least be supporting actively other efforts to have different approaches, given that I think we agree that AI is tremendously important in solving the world's problems. It'd be nice to have some kind of AIs we can support very actively while trying to steer away from the more problematic forms.
I think we got off on a very mathematical anti-emotion position. I think that's a very wrong position, because our senses and our communication, our friendliness, our compassion, our integrity are all tied into that architecture. And if we don't recognize that and build off of it, we're forgetting why we're even doing this in the first place. So we may make science fiction assumptions about the far future and uploading, or dystopian doomsday assumptions about how we're all going to die. So the bottom line is we are using AI today, and AI is making great strides in advances in the fields of medicine, in looking at new theories and new approaches and new practices to resolve diseases that people are suffering from. And it's also being used to help solve some of the problems for those people who are very focused on catastrophic risk of the environment and climate change, etc. So those are solutions that we need today. And another area is human psychology, and a lot of the diseases, depressions, anxieties, and disruptions in societies, especially with the extreme onslaught of opinions about politics and everyone voicing their view and making demands on each other as being a fascist or wrong, etc. And I think it's really important that we take a look at where we are and who we want to become. If we're talking about these LLMs, or talking about superintelligences, and we're being really stupid about it, I think that's a time that we're in the box and see how we can get out of that black box of our own dystopian views of ourselves and our own narrow-minded thinking. And to dismiss it or to pontificate about it, I think is really doing ourselves an injustice.
If you do the right kind of empowerment of human intelligence, etc., so we can solve problems well, that's going to be great, except that we also need to deal with the turbulence, because a lot of people are going to solve bad problems that we don't want solved, like how to mess up the media landscape.
Well, that was what I was leading up to, really, was what are the possibilities? If we were to restrict LLM research in the way that Eliezer wants, or to stop it completely, how would that affect research in biomedical research, longevity research? Do we need LLMs to do that? I'm not sure that we do. Obviously, there are some systems that are very good. Obviously, chess playing computers are not LLMs, and they can do very well. Do we need anything like a general purpose LLM? I mean, maybe it's still an LLM, but a more specialized one. Would that be sufficient? Because I would be less upset about having Eliezer take over and tell us what we can't do, as long as we can still do this freaking research that's going to help us stay alive. So is that a realistic possibility or not?
Like, how do you trust me when I say that, like, maybe I'm paranoid enough, but like Dario Mode isn't paranoid enough?
I think there is a paranoia of trying to just say the future looks dark and dangerous. We need to slow things down. And either you do that because you're reactionary, or you might become a technocrat and try to talk. Now, the interesting problem here is, of course, you can get a lot of good bioscience out of non-general AI. I think if for some weird reason all the AI researchers went home and didn't work on any foundation models being much smarter today, we would have more than enough to do quite a lot of very impressive things. Maybe enough to actually solve aging, maybe a bit more slowly, but I think we still haven't even scraped the surface of what we can do with the existing technology. I think the general problem here is that people mix up the applications with the general intelligence. General intelligence is then used for the applications, and quite often you can fine-tune it to be much more useful because the totally general language model is pointless. You want to turn it into an assistant. You want to turn it into somebody you can actually give commands to rather than something that just speaks like it was the internet. And I think there is a lot of value there. So now I don't think it's likely that we're ever going to stop making bigger foundation models. I think we're past the event horizon about that. So we need to do the best about the cozy confines here inside the event horizon.
Eliezer, you are not backing down. You are adamant about what you're saying and you truly believe it. And I think that's to be respected and highly regarded because that is your view. That staunch plea that you're making is one that can't go by the wayside. It has to be addressed. So let me ask you this. You say there's a group of people that agree and they signed a moratorium and it's like the Beyond Therapy report all over again. And all this is done, but there's some quote unquote bad actors who go on and build it. How are you going to deal with that?
Say North Korea, or do we want to substitute different bad actors here?
Yeah, it could be anyone.
North Korea's fine, except they're very poor. But...
So the United States and China signed an agreement saying roughly nobody anywhere on the planet is allowed to build AI. Like the US and China are agreed on this principle. And then North Korea is like, yeah, we're building an AI anyways. Then I think that the leaders of the US and China send North Korea a message reading like, we know you have nuclear weapons. We are more scared of AI than we are scared of nuclear weapons. Therefore, if you continue to build out this data center that isn't subject to the international monitoring group, we will conventionally bomb the data center in terror of our lives and the lives of our children. And possibly North Korea thinks that they are bluffing. Possibly the US and China are bluffing. Then North Korea goes ahead and builds the data center and the treaty breaks down and then everybody dies. Possibly North Korea thinks that the US and China are bluffing and the US and China actually do have a good model of reality and realize that, North Korea might kill them. And if the worldwide treaty breaks down, that will definitely kill them. So North Korea builds out their data center. The US and China conventionally bomb it. And North Korea either uses its nuclear weapons or not. And either way, the human species survive. And I called it a success.
Many of the treaties work more subtly than that. But systems like this actually have an enormous force in making things function in particular ways and motivating nations and organizations to do things in particular ways. So one shouldn't underestimate that the treaties and the stuff below the treaties, the boring 100-page bureaucratic white papers that nobody outside the building wants to read, they are actually having a fair bit of force. They're not glamorous. It's not very fun to work on it, at least not for people of my mindset, but it's kind of valuable. It's actually good.
Maybe partly because, well, nuclear weapons require, enrichment facilities and lots of infrastructure. Currently, of course, LM approaches that require massive data centers and so on, but that may not always be the case, right? It may be, in fact, I'm sure it's going to be much more of a focus on efficiency right now because they're so vastly expensive to power these things. So a lot more effort's going to go not into scaling, I suspect, which seems to be, well, at least arguably coming to a dead end, but to more efficient systems. So it could become pretty hard to monitor. That's the concern with the power level of nuclear weapons.
So the two ways for people to cause massive destruction and the one way to cause extinction. So the two ways of causing massive destruction with relatively smaller facilities and where the facilities get smaller and smaller as you do more research are bioweapons and AI. Like we are getting smaller and smaller facilities and fewer people and more knowledge out there in the public about how to construct the long latency, slow incubation, extremely contagious virus that kills you 6 months later of 100 different kinds of cancer. And of course, we are also advancing the knowledge, miniaturizing the amount of work that you need to build an AI. Both of those things need to be shut down, but more so the AI.
Actually, I kind of agree on your
Notice
two,
that
but
you
I
might.
switched them around.
Yeah,
But I agree on
exactly.
The interesting part here is that we want to have widespread biotechnology without the bad stuff. And that requires an interesting kind of infrastructure. In order to have a world where a lot of actors can make new self-replicating organisms, you also want good immune systems. We have a technological immune system called vaccination. We have various forms of informational immune systems in our society that handles the spread of risky information, spreads alert to the people who need to respond, etc. You need to build up an infrastructure, and a lot of this is not necessarily coercive. That is, of course, one of the annoying things about us humans. We do think for a lot of reasons, and many of them are invalid, stupid, and wrong. Sometimes we have systems that weed them out effectively enough, so we actually get the good, solid reasons or reliable reasons, or even the wrong reasons that are still producing the right behavior, and that is valuable.
The point is humanity has two problems ongoing that it needs to get under control, preferably without imposing a global dictatorship of scientists publishing their exciting papers, getting the publicity off and career benefits off of that. The rest of us suffer, and like decreasing the cost, decreasing the minimum IQ needed to destroy the world. Moore's law of mad science: every 18 months, the minimum IQ to destroy the world drops by 1 point. We've got two places we need to get that under control, and it's the biotech stuff and it's the AI stuff.
My view is that there are always other ways. There is not just one future. There are various paths, and we can determine and make choices along the way. So with that said, let me ask Eliezer, do you see any way where there could be, in your wildest imagination, a future that is really remarkable, really beneficial, really exciting, where the doomsday scenario doesn't happen, but something else comes about? And if so, what could that be? And I'd like Anders and Max to respond to that as well, so we can leave on a note of possibility.
Keep the AI stuff from killing you, keep the viruses from killing you, and augment human intelligence. I think that there's more or less paranoid ways to do this, and the more paranoid ways are the better ones. But even if you did it in a relatively less paranoid way, I would still have some hope. The thing is, a lot of humans start out friendly, and you can tell whether or not you've successfully made them smarter in a way that you cannot tell whether by making a little baby AI say the right things today, you've created something that is, still going to be on your side after it is vastly smarter than you or after it builds a whole nother AI. So conventional science may work on human intelligence enhancement, and if you pick the right people or just get lucky, they might start off friendly enough that even after making them smarter, you are still doing okay. So that's what sort of like cuts the impossible knot of you can't tell whether or not the thing you're going to do now is going to kill you later. You can, some humans are friendly, and if you make them smarter, maybe that turns out okay. There's also more paranoid ways to do it, but that's the basic idea.
Thank you, Eliezer. Anders.
And I think most people, most humans are friendly. We're just stupid, and that means that quite often our friendliness actually leads to all sorts of grief. But I do think that intelligence enhancement is indeed a form of moral enhancement. If I can foresee the consequences of my action better, if I can control my actions better, then great things are possible. If I also can empathize better, these are very useful things. And I think AI can actually help us here. I do think that if you have sufficiently aligned AI assistants of various kind, and maybe not just AI assistants, I want not so much some little angel or devil sitting on my shoulder as I want a head-up display helping me function better, but I might also need my lawyer bot ring fencing me and acting as a firewall from other lawyer bots trying to sue me and so on. That kind of extended infrastructure, if it works well enough, I think can extend us tremendously. And it might indeed be that we also make AI that are persons in various philosophical exciting form that have value. But
I do note that the current AI guys just went straight off and built the AI that would flatter humans and twist off the humans in weird directions. And this is the kind of thing you could have at least tried to have some foresight about. I tried, but they don't care. And
who
things are
listened to
not
a
going
mailing
the
list
fun
in the
way so
90s?
far. things are no more going your fun way, Anders, than they are currently going my fun way.
Yep. So we need to move things more in our fun ways.
Thank you.
One thing I've noticed about AIs recently, kind of what you just mentioned, is they have become more flattering. They've become more, oh, what a brilliant question, what an incisive question, and you're completely right, and here's why. And you just have to sort of push back on them and say, well, tell me why I might not be right as well. And it's too bad the companies don't seem to be training these systems on critical and creative thinking skills. They're basically going out there and gathering data to support whatever you start with. So that I think needs to change.
You need to set your system prompt for your LLM to actually not flatter you. That helps a bit.
But from what you're saying, Anders, the idea that more intelligence automatically, well, not automatically, it tends to lead to better behavior and more morality.
In humans.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that, I mean, that's kind of Plato's idea, basically, that all evil is due to ignorance. I'm not actually that optimistic. I wish I was. I think that for humans, again, because we have these emotional drives and, imperatives built in by evolution, I think it's quite possible for someone to know, not even on a terribly subconscious level, but, sort of medium level, that what they're doing is just absolutely wrong, but the hell with it, they're going to do it anyway because they have rage or anxiety or depression and so on. Now that, of course, it shouldn't be an issue for AI because it doesn't have any of those emotions. So that's kind of a question we really didn't get to discuss as to, why they do all these destructive things without having those drives. And I think that's kind of the point I really still don't understand Eliezer's argument there. But I think just having more intelligence alone is not necessarily going to lead to more moral outcomes. I think it does help because of the reasons you mentioned, Anders, that you understand better understanding of the benefits of cooperation, of trade, comparative advantage, cooperation, all those kind of things. But if you have that kind of blind rage or anxiety or territorialism, you're just going to ignore everything your brain is telling you.
Thank you. I see a positive future, and control is not lost because intelligent systems exist, and we can have more control if we become more mutable and flexible in our own belief systems without losing, as Eliezer said, that the elements of our core values, and that how we can align with that on a very basic, fundamental level. What is missing largely is a vision of the future that is both pragmatic and possible, that doesn't see an end to humanity, but a possible future, and how AI can help us get there. Thank you all very much for being here. Okay.
Thank you.